I'm 61. You might think I became interested in end of life because I'm aging. But actually that isn't the case. I became interested. I faced end of life because of this person. She was my first wife. Her name was Joanne. She was an incredible person. I met her when I was 16. And between then and the time she died, when I was 42, we had nearly every sort of relationship two people can have except enemies. We were friends, we were lovers, we were married, we lived together, married without law, but still. We parented together, we were roommates. She was actually my roommate when I gave birth to my first child. And that might be slightly more common in the lesbian and gay, particularly. I don't know about bisexual and transgender communities, that the bonds we form are so precious that we sometimes keep them beyond the definition of the relationship. And that was true of us, but the last 6.5, 7 years of her life, we were committed partners. That was such a transformative experience for me, I can't capture it. She had multiple myeloma. It's a universal, at that point, I don't think this is true anymore, but it was universally fatal quickly. So when she was diagnosed, she was given 6 months to a year. She lived 8 years beyond that point. And that means that we were living next to death every moment of that 8 years. But we lived next to death differently from the start to the finish. I want to give you a sense of the start. Oh my God, I'll never live through this. I'm going to throw up. What will I do without her? What's wrong with me? Why is this happening? What's wrong with life? I was basically panicked for a couple of years. It was such a, regardless of whether we were together or not, I always pictured being old with her, which is quite an astounding thing to remember, but I did always picture that. We were very supportive of each other, regardless. And, you know, I had some experience with death. I couldn't be in my community at that time and not have had experience because AIDS was happening. My daughter's father's partner was HIV positive, and that was a very big thing when we found that out. The whole community was losing members of the community. And on the other end, I live near San Francisco, there was a pretty big divide between the gay men and the lesbians. We didn't have that much to do with each other, and that completely changed during the AIDS crisis. Suddenly we were one community. A lot of lesbians who are at the lowest risk for AIDS of anyone on the planet were offering care and support to people who were losing just person after person after person after person. And that's another thing I want you to know. If you deal with clients who lived through that, they may have lost their whole communities. And in San Francisco, that is resulting in, you'd think San Francisco would be a great place to be an old LGBT person, but actually it's not true. People are quite isolated. They were afraid to ever reform communities. There are a lot of people living alone and afraid to access services because even in San Francisco, they're not welcome. And so a lot of people are having the choice of either going back into the closet, which is hard if you've been out a lifetime. It reorders your thinking entirely, or get stigmatized in the environments where they're trying to get care. So that's a big problem, and that does go back to that period of time. So, as I said, Joanne and I were dealt with her illness for 8 years. She was sick for 10. She was not diagnosed for 2. And just a note on a subject I'm not speaking about today. She was not diagnosed because she was African American. They would not, she had back pain and they would not x-ray her because they thought she was malingering. And when they finally did x-ray her, she had a broken leg. So that's just another, I can't help but say that, even though it's not relevant to really what we're talking about today. So we had these 8 years, and we lived them in community. And that's another thing that I think is important to talk about today, that you know, people may come who didn't lose everybody and not reform with a greater sense of the importance of their community, because most of us depended on community. Joanne, for instance, none of her family members, they knew that she was sick and they knew she was a lesbian. None of them did aftercare for her when she was dying. And so, because they weren't comfortable with us and with her. And so it was our community that were our family. And this means if you have LGBT people come, those relationships may be very much more important to them than their siblings or their parents or any of the other people that are legally related to them. And the older the person is, the less likely they'll be to be married to their partner or spouse. So that paying a lot of attention to how that person talks about the people in their life, particularly if they're not saying that they're LGBT, is really vital. So she died in 1995. In 1997, I met the second great love of my life. I'm a little extra nervous today because she's here. She's usually not at my presentations. When Joanne was dying, our social worker, who at the time was sitting on the bed with us because she was now homebound, I turned to her and I said, if I ever am with anyone again, it has to be someone I can die with and who I would like to help die. And she said, whoa, that's a high standard. To which I said, that's the only standard. Because if I'm 42, if I can't do that, what am I doing with a person? And that was a very good rule of thumb. So Deb is that person. Not only that, but she could parent. The kids are, at that time, 3-year-old, like maybe a month into our relationship. Deb was at one end of the table, she was at the other, and she looked straight over at Deb and she said, are you going to die too? To which Deb said, I'll be here as long as you need me. She's 22 now. So I feel very twice blessed in my life to have had many other relationships before that, but 2 that were true marriages. We got married about a year later. That was 1998, so there was no marriage. But we got married, about 200 people came, and my dad, the minister, performed the ceremony. So that, to me, speaks to the incredible change, the number of different experiences you might encounter working with LGBT people. You know, if, let's say someone came out right now, that's a totally different experience than what I had, or many other people. I'm going to tell the story of marriage equality through our marriage. So this was our marriage of spirit. And it's the anniversary we celebrate. It's the moment we became married in our own eyes. In 2003, Canada legalized marriage, and we ran right up there and got married legally. It still was not recognized anywhere in the US. But it was very funny. We went in to get the license, and they said, we're so sorry, but we haven't changed the forms yet, and well, one of you has to be the husband. It's me. Then we renewed our vows in 2008 when marriage was very briefly legal in our state. before it was criminalized practically by Proposition 8. I really honestly cried bitter tears at that moment. It's so hard. You get used to not having a right, but then when you have it and it goes away, it's pretty terrible. But let's get fast forward. The Supreme Court took care of it, and we renewed our vows on the steps of the courthouse in Oakland, California. What I thought was really funny, a lot of people were getting married for the first time, but they gave people the option to renew, which was wonderful. We did that. And there was one heterosexual couple there, and nobody discriminated. They got married too. It was pretty tempting. There were judges, there were politicians, the mayor of Oakland, you know, you got married by someone special, a lot of people giving away free photographs. They had a very nice wedding. So that was pretty cool. So that's my story up to the present moment. And now I'm facing aging. I have hearing aids to prove it. And when I was preparing for this, I did a lot of looking around, and I had some really wrong assumptions. There's just been a report come out about San Francisco, about aging for LGBT people in San Francisco, and it is a dire and horrible situation. 30% of the people on the street in San Francisco are gay. 15% of the population are gay. People are reporting horrible experiences going into care facilities. Horrible. Just, you know, people coming into the room to offer personal care, wiping of butts, and trying to proselytize. This is in San Francisco. So just imagine what it's like in other parts of the country. I personally can't imagine that. So here are the things I want you to know that people may have experienced before they get to you. Nearly all of us have experienced verbal or physical assaults as a result of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Definitely true of me. Gay and bisexual men are at higher risk for HIV/AIDS, so more of your clients will have it, or nearly anyone who's older than me will have lost people. That's the next item. There's a greater risk for alcohol, drug, and tobacco addiction as a result of internalized oppression. A majority of us are afraid, and this has been studied by, I have a slide on it later, Karen Fredrickson. You can go to the website Caring and Aging with Pride Over Time, and they just came out with a national research study, and it's longitudinal, that they've presented to the White House on LGBT aging issues. So we're afraid to get services because if our sexual orientation or gender identity is known because of stigmatization. Higher than average chance of being homeless. Frequently experience attempts to change us, sometimes by the healthcare workers we're dependent on. Lesbians and bisexual women, this doesn't get talked about as much, are at an increased risk for breast cancer and obesity. I added that as a result of membership. They're still sorting out why, but that's certainly a factor. At risk of being separated from key family of choice members if we need assisted care because they have no legal status. There have been times when partners have been put in separate rooms, for instance. And some healthcare workers will refuse to treat us if we're LGBT. So that's a pretty, I wasn't afraid before because I've been out my whole life. I'm good at being out, obviously. And I was just kind of like, oh, I'll just say I'm gay. You know, it's not that big a deal, but it's a really big deal. And I'm sending my paper to my kids because I don't think they know whatsoever that it's a big deal. They're just like, oh, that's over. It's fine now. So I want to end with some things you can do to make your environments LGBT welcoming. Designate an LGBT liaison in your organization who is LGBT or receives some advanced training on how to serve this community. Make sure your literature reflects that you're an open and inclusive environment, because if you've thought to do that in advance, it's going to be much more likely that people are going to actually tell you that they're LGBT. Develop questionnaires for potential clients that reflect diversity. Who do you consider family? Who's important in your life? Have you ever been mistreated because of the category you belong to? And of course, these would help with any person who comes in your environment, but they're just so much more important for LGBT people. Sponsor a gay-straight alliance and offer programs specifically geared to LGBT members. History of LGBT rights or ways to address biblical concerns about being LGBT, and hopefully others that aren't LGBT would come to that presentation, because I think it's also about educating members of the community you serve so that when people are sitting down to have lunch together, that person is not going to be sitting with someone who has no idea how to relate to them. Offer periodic in-service trainings for staff. And I say periodic because in most care environments, staff changes a lot. So a lot of turnover usually. Periodically refreshing what people understand about serving LGBT members is critical. And when you're interviewing people, check out how they react to, if you say, our environment is accepting and affirming of LGBT members who might come here. How does that person react? And consider that in your hiring. Highlight information about your inclusive policies in your advertising material. And that's not hard to do. We watched that change in the schools our kids went to from, and we had to look for a school that would support us as a family to lots of schools have that in their literature. And include that information when you bring people into the organization, when you make presentations. Make sure people know that they will find a supportive, friendly place when they get there. Be clear that you specifically talked about transgender people very much, but it's a critically important issue. They're the worst off of the whole community. It's very hard for them to have acceptance, and they have much less ability to get proper health care and proper services. So you can help that a little bit by accepting the gender assignment that a person gives themselves and supporting that in practical ways. Calling them their chosen name, whether it's legal or not. Including them in the activities that are for their gender identification, and allowing them to use the bathroom that fits for them. Aggressively train your staff in meeting the needs of clients regardless of difference. I heard Karen Fredrickson speak recently, and she said, we're going to help everybody again, because what it takes to meet the needs of an LGBT person is not, it's specifically different, but it is not generally different. All people, in order to do what they need to do at end of life, review their lives, get a good death, and feel supported in that process, it's the same things. It just takes a little more information to do it well for us. So here's my takeaway for the entire talk, and then I'll take questions for a few minutes. Don't wait until an LGBT person shows up at your door to change. Put it in place before anyone ever talks about being LGBT in your organization. Just a few little simple things, whatever you can do to make your environment welcoming will make such a huge, huge difference to me when I show up on your doorstep.